Right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you. My video now tonight is about freedom and how to attain or develop the consciousness in order to experience this freedom. Now, if one looks at our lifestyle in the Western world today, it's even affected in the Eastern world in many ways. Uh, there are about 700,000 self-help books that are available in the world market, and these are books that talk about self-esteem. It talks about the development of good leadership and being able to find your live in the moment, etc., and find yourself. All of these particular books are available, and people are buying it. People are going to specific talks. Some of the tickets are like 4,000 rand a ticket. And then the basic feature is they're building self-esteem. Now, the question is, adults are attending these particular programs on self-esteem and developing self-worth, etc., buying books on this. So what did they do at school? That's a big question. Okay, here's the answer. The schools break it down. And then you realize when you finish school, oh my goodness, I've actually learned nothing in the real terms about myself. It's so career orientated and everybody's like market orientated, but these were old markets. You can't even find jobs with the old certificates or the certificates today because it is outdated now. The skills are not there and they say this and that and that. But the fact of the matter is you found that when a grade one learner comes into school, this enthusiastic young child, all the potentials, all of a sudden he just becomes an average kind of person that is being a new child being placed in an old market, and it just destroys the self-esteem. So what happens is, going through the whole school life, it's very hard for us to accept that because we're all part of that, we are part of that culture. But if it didn't perhaps destroy the self-esteem, it showed then that people either became ill or depressed or lost their ability to express themselves, or they turned to crime in order to build up that lack of personal worth that has been broken down. Because we know that education primarily serves an old market. It's designed by governments and business standing together in order to plan some sort of curriculum, in order to make it socio-economic, politically viable for the city to have this, or the country to have these kind of citizens that will basically obey at the end of the day. And then the whole curriculum is designed in such a way that it is memory based. So even if you have a series of criteria in your spreadsheet, the computer in actual fact gives more weight to the examination, which was based on memory, than on the projects. And if there is a 15%, more than 15% difference between the practical mark and the examination mark, then the inspectors actually drop that practical mark to make it. And now that is totally unacceptable, because you actually, not all kids are good at memory work. We know ourselves. We go and look at a movie, somebody asks us to tell the movie, we won't be able to tell the person in sequence about the movie in real terms. We'll forget most of it just 1 hour after we've actually watched the movie. So what about testing a child at the end of the year on things that he did at the beginning of the year? Of course it will. Only a few people will be able to survive such examinations and such education. And so this is based on what they call the normal probability curve. So these psychologists are all funded by business people, etc., that have an interest in developing markets, so develop even psychological features that will actually support this. So this is what they call the normal probability curve, where you have a certain amount on the low percentage, a greater amount on the average percentage, and a few on the higher. And examinations must actually be set on this. It has nothing to do with actually potential. It's actually the marketplace that you're preparing the masses for. You get a small amount of cleaners, a large amount of producers, and a small amount of leaders. And that's basically what everybody's mind is being pressed to actually accept this kind of. So question papers are actually designed that way, with what you call, uh, multiple choice questions and higher level questions and Bloom's taxonomy and all that kind of stuff. This is all to manipulate young minds in order to press them into an old market. So if you have that kind of educational systems, then obviously you're not going to have the skills required in the job market, because it is like 20 to 30 years behind time. Because many of the people that plan education has never been out of school. They've gone into school, from school to college, from college to university, from university became teachers, from teachers became inspectors, inspectors became ministers or whatever. They've never been out of school. They've always been living in a world, like a fantasy world of not real. I can always go back on my particular exam, and I can always give another exam, etc. And I can mark and follow the mistake in the mathematics and give a mark, which is not really a true reflection of the mathematics or whatever the case may be. So that whole system of education breaks down the self-esteem. It makes people, when other people judge your ability of to do something and you're not allowed to judge your own, it obviously will break people's trust in themselves, and it's based on fear. So I've started a, a parent organization, which I'm hoping it will grow, parent business organization, because parents have a right as citizens to ask government, or to instruct government, or to be able to tell government, you must educate or help my children in the best possible way. And they are public servants, and the public must actually open up their mouths and state what is correct. Now the public don't do that, because what public do is, and they basically, what they've done is they've basically made us believe that we have to vote for a government to do what we are supposed to do. So what we do actually is, when we vote, we actually give our power away to make the changes that we can actually make. And we say, no, I'll throw the papers on the floor because I voted for council, and council must pick it up. So the personal responsibility is taken out of life, and we give it to somebody else to do. And now, when the people are in offices, etc., they don't do what the people asked for. They make promises and they don't follow the promises, and then people start striking and wanting it because they've tax is being deducted, but it's not provided for, etc. But that is the trick of working with people, where you put your trust in others, where you could have done it yourself, or you can develop yourself. So 50% of people basically vote in any country, and 50% don't vote. So maybe one should ask the people who don't vote, let's stand together and let's assist each other to do something qualitative. So if one looks at the education, how does it actually break down people's self-esteem? Then you can actually see it in the manner in which it's administered or it's managed. It's all based on fear, all based on monitoring this and monitoring that. And it's not about trust, it's about mistrusting everything. So if one looks at the two terms of learning and education, you find education is so the term education is like a human construct. It's not real. It's something that people manipulate in terms of standards and assessment criteria, etc., to manipulate a market, to manipulate the people. Learning is a divine gift. One learns every second of the day, and our learning is automatic, and nobody controls that learning. It's a divine gift. But education is a control feature in terms of the market, in terms of how many accountants do we need, and how many lawyers do we need, etc., and how many of this do we need, and so on. We'll drop the marks and pick up the marks and manipulate the results, etc. And then we've got the market, we've got the people to fit into that old market. The rest, the unemployed, okay, we'll just moan about it all the time, but we will do nothing about it because we don't have the capacity to do anything about it, because we all somehow into that particular doldrum of thinking that the systems work. But the systems is showing that it doesn't work, and we need to be able to move out of that particular. So the freedom really eludes the masses. The simple answer is because man depends. Whatever you depend on, you become a captive of that thing if you depend on a thing. other than the Creator. If you depend on money, you become a captive of money. If you depend on your government, you become a captive of the government. If you depend on your abilities or your skills, you become a captive of that, and then you lose your freedom. So, so when people depend on man as a provider, the provider normally takes advantage of people, and they know because he works on fears, etc. He can manipulate people until that people may give their assets and spend their money in order to have that kind of access to the right people and the right connections and the right loans and the right funding, etc. And not knowing that you're actually just losing it all because you have become so attached to people that you have to manipulate even your own principles in order to get something out of the particular people who control the finances or the resources. So when one looks at divine revelation, it actually warns people against becoming obsessed with anything that is earthly, obsessed with man, with leaders, etc., and losing your connection with the Creator. The moment you lose that connection with the Creator, and you can lose your soul. But the books are always there. The Quran is always there. The Bible is always there in its true form. The Injil, the good people are always there as reference points for us to try and reflect and come back to the past, because whatever we suffer, we actually suffer by our own hands. We've created it by our own hands, and so we suffer. But even that is a mercy, because it brings us back to the realization of wanting to ask the Creator for help. So what's happening is that, say 2008, 2009, with the crash of the economies, there were more people in church and more people praying because many people lost their jobs, etc., than what it was before. So people realized that you can't put your trust in material things anymore. You have to be good, and you have to change your attitude in order to arrive at that freedom to be the real person. So what happens is, the same people that finance governments, finance education institutions, finance universities, finance schools, finance empowerment programs, etc., finance community work, etc. Some of the same people, in actual fact, control the publication of self-help books, etc. And so after they've broken down the self-esteem of the masses, they then give them books in order to build their self-esteem up, and then they go back into the situation and they still feel they haven't achieved anything, but now the ticket has been bought already, but they've rubbed shoulders with some elite people, etc., and makes them feel good. So what it does actually, the way people lose their freedom is to make people attach themselves to something physical or something material, put their trust in that, and then at the end of the day to manipulate that and make the person insecure. So the insecurity, the loss of self-esteem, etc., comes from when you realize that somehow you are trapped. But sometimes people don't realize that they actually have been designers of that trap themselves, because they have made themselves so vulnerable by trying to gain favor in different ways to find a kind of a illusionary freedom. People even go so far as to try and discredit religion and discredit faith in order to make people not attach or not become God conscious, but to become man conscious and on the systems that man creates. And somehow many people don't even realize that Satan is behind the whole planning. He uses whoever he wants to. People become friends with him in different ways. But the plan, if you look at the whole plan, it all fits in. It all fits in perfectly, and people just destroy themselves from within communities, etc. So the greatest factor to actually try and... So what is the core agenda behind people selling ideas to people and people grabbing onto those ideas is the fact that people want to be in control. Some people wanting to be in control, the top people want to be in control, and they buy the middle class, etc., or some of the people to actually be the gatekeepers to make sure that everything runs according to the few at the top. Now, in the previous times, there has always been some rich people who have always been manipulating the masses. When the prophets came, they were to be the first people to question the prophets and be haughty and arrogant about their provisions, etc. And so you'll find the Quran has got stories about these people and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed them. So that is a common feature of manipulation. So how does one in actual fact um, get out of that? And what is the core agenda behind people wanting power, wanting control? Is they want to be aggrandized, they want to be praised, they want to be looked at, and they want to behave like little gods. And that is the underlying feature of people wanting control and using people to control their particular and to control their resources in order to make them important. Now that is the most dangerous part of life, is to look for praise or to look for aggrandization, and through power struggles, through marginalizing people who are good and trying to upgrade yourself, etc., etc. This is the greatest danger, and the prophets have been warning people about this. There is no one that must be praised except the Creator. So what one is trying to do when one's looking for self-praise, you're actually trying to steal an attribute that belongs to the Creator. It's inside of us. 99 names, 99 attributes of the Creator is inside of us, and we have to try and uh, embody it in the service of people, in the service of people, the remembrance of the Creator. And then the universe in its creation will actually serve us. If not, the opposite will happen. The universe, in whatever is there, will destroy us eventually. The rain will not come. Earthquakes, etc. Even wars, for instance, one nation will destroy another nation uh, because people are actually calling those balancing features. That's basically called balancing features in the universe. That sorts out the evil and makes it um, creates a balance again, so that people can again find peace and develop a new nation. Now, people might be saying, yeah, but some innocent people go through that as well. Yeah, that is the test we need to be able to say. Some people say, I don't want to believe because people go through suffering. We don't know, because some things that we see is a particular suffering might not be at all. It's because what we see and what we observe could be not exactly the way it is. I give an example. I was knocked down by a truck. I had enormous amount of injuries. I had 6 broken ribs, cracked skull, my eyes were damaged, and I had a cut across my face. Now, people who looked at me would say, "Oh, shame." I knew nothing about it. I was unconscious for 18 hours. I knew not a single thing from that particular event. So what we see, similarly with my asthma, I was a terrible asthmatic when I was a child. People will come and say, "Shame, look at him, he's struggling with it." For me, I didn't know any other life. For me, it was just the way it is. I never knew any other life. So I didn't have a comparative feature. So for me, I was happy. I see the world. I was struggling, yes, but I was content and I was happy as a child. But from another perspective, people thought it was absolute suffering. So we can't really look at things and come to conclusions and say it is so or it isn't so, because many things are illusionary. Let's give an example. Um, in physics, we know that the color that anything is a reflection of the frequency which the object reflects and does not absorb. In other words, it's the color that the thing doesn't want that is reflected to the eye. So what is the color of the thing? If the color that it is reflected is actually not the color that is absorbed, that makes us think. So how many other things that we're looking at is not illusionary? And this is the So freedom primarily is to become aware of the real, of what is real, what is the reality. And to be able to experience reality, one must raise our consciousness. To drop people's consciousness, you develop fear. To raise people's consciousness, you remove the fear. The moment the fear is removed, the consciousness widens because people are more aware, more appreciative of what's around them. The more you increase the fear, the more the people contract. And that is in the first surah of the Quran. Oh Allah, make us of those who you have expanded, and not of those whom you have contracted them. And this is the difference between a consciousness based on fear and a consciousness based on trust in the Creator. So the great and how does one, if one is not looking, if one is looking for, how do we get out of this particular doldrum that we in, which basically feeds the ego all the time. It feeds the ego. As long as it feeds the ego, it kicks the brain into a kind of a addictive mode of, it gives me pleasure to do this and it gives me pleasure to do that, and but it's on a lower level. So how do we get to a higher level of thinking? It basically asks of us to become humble, have humility. Now humility in this case is not the kind of disempowered servanthood of man to man. Then you are humble. No, but humility here is defined as the realization of the absolute power of the Creator, and that the self is insignificant in the bigger dimensions of the Creator, and therefore dependence on Him alone will create that particular uh, mind or body or soul that can um, draw all those blessings that are coming all the time to us and make us shine with absolute divinity, because that's the core feature of religion, of faith, is to become less of the lower self, more or less of the ego self, and quiet down our minds and move out of ourselves and see the beauty and the miracles of life and become grateful for that. And that creates a wider kind of appreciation of what is around us. And then what happens is we automatically relax because we are in a state of absolute joy, because we appreciate every particular thing. On the other hand, people will make us try, and the fear of that and the fear of that, and afterwards we don't even have the basic joy of enjoying a meal, for that matter. There's not enough salt in this, and not this and that. The basic things in life we tend to just don't even appreciate that because the fear factor is so great. So anything that draws you to fear, keep away from it. Anything that gives you an opportunity to appreciate, move towards that. Now, the fear factor develops the ego to become to self-protect, to try to protect yourself, and the gratefulness develops humility, which allows one to open oneself up and be less fearful. So we know that if we want to then move away from the kind of traps that has made us dependent, we need to find ways of becoming independent. And becoming independent means that we will start following the energy that's inside of us. If we feel we want to do something, then we do it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that all good things come from Him and not from us. So if we have an idea of wanting to do good, don't hesitate, do it, because Allah will send the help. Because the moment we have the thought of wanting to do something which is we're passionate about, you will the whispers will start. No, why do you want to do this? What are people going to say? And all of that kind of comments. Even people will say, you just want to be different. And those are obviously the instruments of Shaitan. It's trying to use people as well as jinn in order to break down people. So if one don't listen to that and you just follow that energy, you find joy in what you're doing, you find creativity, and that creativity comes from the inner self, that ruh, that spirit of God that is inside of us. And in that way, we raise our consciousness. I remember giving a lecture about the importance of a tree. The tree in the Quran, Allah talks about the tree. It gives you shade, it gives you fruit, it gives you, wood, it gives you all of it. And I was like talking about this tree, and one of the students came the following week and said, sir, I actually, for the first time, realized there is actually a tree in the corner of our garden. Never saw it. You see, so the consciousness widens, the more grateful one becomes. And this is what the prophets are doing. It's making us more aware of the universe, of the sun and the moon. Some people don't even know when there's blue skies or whatever the case may be, or how to appreciate just a basic plant. And they even tell people, why do you want to, people will say, stop and smell the coffee. Although I don't drink coffee, but we know what it means. It's just to enjoy a moment, and then in that way it allows you to tap into the spirit, which is absolutely free. It is there always waiting for us to tap into it. And that is the motivation, where the motivation comes from the energy to do something beyond space and time. And sometimes you will do something with that kind of energy, and it will take you 3-4 minutes, but it will take some people a lifetime to study that same thing. And this is the kind of thing. Time is in the creation, is in the hands of the Creator. He can decide to give people a consciousness of future, past, present in the same moment. It's entirely how much we are prepared to remove the veils from ourselves to become more aware of what He has granted us and what we can be grateful for. And that is the difference between a kafir, a disbeliever, and a believer, is that the kafir is ungrateful. His first feature is ungrateful. And if he becomes too ungrateful for what he has got, he then becomes a liar. He starts covering up the truth. The same word, kafara, means to become ungrateful. Kafara means to cover up the truth. And kafara means to become an infidel, to become a disbeliever. And if he stops lying as much as he can, it becomes a habit of him, then eventually the Creator removes the malaikas, the angels that are with us. Everybody have got angels with us, and provide for that person the shaitan to be his intimate friends. And whatever he does of wrong, even, he will not even see is wrong, because the shaitan, the guidance has been taken away from him, and then everything he does which is wrong, he will try to even justify it, and he will actually believe that this is the correct thing to do. And so this is the kind of lower consciousness of life, but always in a state of fear. Those people are always in a state of fear. They fear so much that as they present this kind of powerful self, the increase in security increases. The amount of people that must watch out for them and security features for them becomes more and more, because the fear factor raises. That is basically the reward for becoming ungrateful to the Creator, is the fear factor increases, and your consciousness lowers, and your sense of freedom is lost. You seem to become contracted within yourself. And if people become too much contracted with themselves, they come to the real point of just committing suicide. And this is where we all, in actual fact, would not like that to happen to anybody. So this is the duty of good people, is to continue speaking about the good things and helping each other. And sometimes it won't help, because that person will not listen, but at least we've tried. It's for our own benefit to actually do what we must do. The result is entirely in the hands of the Creator. He decides whether that person will be guided by what we've done, whether they will change his mindset, or whether he will be the same. But in terms of losing our self-esteem, it is designed through our schools and our prescriptive schooling to break it down and to make everybody a decent, or not a decent, an obedient citizen, to put all his trust in government, and government must do everything for them, and then it's a whole manipulation feature until people start turning the table in terms of becoming learned, not learned, but becoming people who are open to learning, and not being restricted by certain features. You must do this, and then you can do that, and then you do that. We put our trust in systems. The systems will not provide us anything. If you put our trust in the Creator, the systems will actually, the things around us will come towards us, and people will offer us things, and things will happen to us which we will actually be amazed how the Creator looks after His ibad. Now, His ibad are people who are His adorers, the people who love the Creator. And this is the, the, the difference between just superficial belief and real belief. Real belief is to truly love the Creator. And we adore Him to such an extent that we don't want to lose contact with Him. And we so try to do the right thing all the time so that we don't disturb the connection that we have with the divine blessings. And if we don't do that, then we do the wrong thing, and then we will look for man-made things to keep us safe, to provide for us, etc. And when we submit to that reality, then learning becomes a reality. So, in terms of talking about these things, there is no, we have to do something. So what I did was to create a holistic curriculum related reflections in which we have a completely new form of knowledge, holistic leisure learning that develops a consciousness of the Creator and at the same time have knowledge of all subjects. Because all subjects actually come from the Creator. There's no separation of subjects in the real terms. The separation of subjects came with the introduction of industrialization, with specialization, etc., etc. So we basically designed this one book. Over 28 years I've worked on it, and this book will guide the actual thinking towards an integrational appreciation of life. And that is a very high level of knowledge, a very high level of awareness. And this is definitely with all humility and all acceptance, not because I did it, but when the Creator allows us to do things like this. This is beyond what your conventional educational infrastructures can offer, because its basis of fractionalization of knowledge have developed fractionalized personalities and an enormous amount of crime, an enormous amount of disorientation and health issues, etc., which even the businesses own for that matter. So it's also very beneficial sometimes for the people in power to have crime and to have illness, because it makes the rich richer and it creates more impoverished masses in order to usurp development. So there is this particular new curriculum that integrates everything, and it gives a quick access to high levels of knowledge. So just to give at the end of this particular video, I'd like to